I'd like to invite Dr. Adnan Chilwan to the stage, please, Chief Executive Officer, Dubai Islamic Bank, to be interviewed by Dr. Saeed Farouk, Global Head of Islamic Capital Markets, Thomson Reuters.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is really my privilege and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to interview this gentleman right next to me. I've been following Dr. Adnan Chilwan for several years, before he became the CEO and now that he is a CEO. And I've always admired his passion and, of course, his determination and grit. I'm sure all of you have, but I'll give you a little bit of a background into Dr. Adnan Chilwan. He rose up the ranks over 2 decades of working in several Islamic banks across the GCC, and from very humble beginnings in all respects. On top of that, he does happen to be the youngest CEO of the oldest Islamic bank. So on that note, I wanted to start off this conversation with understanding the oldest Islamic bank is now turning 40, I guess, Dr. Adnan Chilwan. That obviously in everyone's mind is, are you actually older than the oldest Islamic bank or actually younger than it? How old are you?
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My friend Syed here actually has been stalking me for a very long time. And he conned me into being here today. And if you want to sell anything, you have to make it very controversial. So he just put a spin by saying I'm the youngest CEO. I am definitely the youngest looking CEO. But I am young enough to be the CEO of the oldest Islamic bank.
That's excellent. And I know that you are, I think you are youngest. I've looked at all the other CEOs and they don't have as much.
I'm the youngest looking CEO, yes.
They don't have, they have much more white hair than you. So I'll take that as a cue. Dubai Islamic Bank, as you know, is the largest Islamic bank in the UAE. Has been operating for more than 40 years. One of the best performing banks in 2014, and is looking to be one of the best performing banks in the MENA region for 2015. It ranks in the top 5 banks in UAE and has got growth and rapid expansion plans all across the world. What I'd want to know is, and it's also, at the same time, it's also had the opportunity and I guess the challenges of facing the global financial crisis where it went through a period of tumult and difficult circumstances, both because of the exposure to Dubai, but also because of its exposure to real estate. Dr. Adnan has managed, in a very short period of time, to take Dubai Islamic Bank from a very difficult period and steer it towards a period of very strong growth and a solid balance sheet. He's been known to be, having talked to a lot of his colleagues at Dubai Islamic Bank and other financial institutions, he's been known to be a hawk when it comes to financials and looking at the numbers. Maybe that's part of your genetic makeup. But, he knows all aspects of the bank's operations, and the rumors I hear is that he knows what each branch is doing wherever they are in the world. So I guess, I mean, the natural thing that comes to mind first is, how did you make it up here? As I say, the youngest CEO of the oldest Islamic bank, it's a little bit interesting for everyone here, and myself too, right? Maybe one day I'll be one of the youngest CEOs. Although I think I've passed it because you're younger than me, right?
You won't be the youngest CEO, anyways.
And how did you make it up here? Who are the people and the experiences that made you who you are? And what were the most defining moments of your life to kind of shape you as a human being and a leader?
Very humble beginnings, obviously. We come from a middle class family, and clearly a family where culture and humanity, being human and humanity was utmost than anything in the world. Clearly, I think the most difficult thing that one faces in life, the biggest challenge is not knowing what to do. My parents come from a very humble background, so clearly they're not very well decorated or highly educated. So
what did your parents used to do?
My mom is a housewife, and my dad obviously had a small business. So
Small business in Dubai?
in Dubai, yeah. So not very highly decorated and clearly not very well educated. And when that happens, you don't get a lot of advice as far as career guidance is concerned. So I think I'm just blessed to be where I am today. And clearly I say that with utmost humility and from the bottom of my heart.
When did you make it to Dubai?
Well, I was born in Dubai.
Okay.
So I've lived my life in Dubai. So Dubai is home. We originally come from India. I think everybody that I've met in my life has had an impact on my life. Life is all about experiences. Some of them are painful, some of them are painless. You know, the painful ones with boyfriend-girlfriend experiences. Some of them are painless, but all of them are priceless, right? So clearly, for me, everybody has had an impact on my life, but if you want to probably name one person, that's my mother. I think I owe everything to her, and the funny thing is that she really doesn't know the impact that she's had on my life.
How is that? I mean, how is she? I've heard you say this a few times now. How is it that she's impacted you? Is it in the inspiration, or is it the humility? What?
I think not so much inspiration, but maybe the humility and the modesty. I think I still remember something that she had said when I was starting my career, the first day of my job, and she had actually mentioned something that I think molded me as an individual. It was many years ago. I know calculators are out, so people want to know how old I am, but that's not important. But it was many years ago when it was my first day, and I was walking out of my house going to HSBC. I started my career with HSBC. So I meet my mother at the door, and she says, "My son, you're looking very nice and smart." And I say, "Mommy, thank you," because obviously, every mother would say the same about their child. So she said, "You're looking very smart, and you know what? You're going to become very successful in life." And I'm like, "Give me a break, This is my first day. I'm very young. I've had no experience to boast." And my mom tells me, "You're going to become very successful, like every other mother." But she says, "Remember, my child, remember two things, and never forget this no matter what happens." And I'm saying, "Mommy, you know what? I don't have time, please." You know how we talk to our parents, right?
How old were you then?
Yeah, old enough to be the CEO of the So she tells me, "You're going to become very successful, but remember two things that I'm going to tell you." I said, "What's that?" She says, "Make sure the higher you go, your feet are always on the ground, right?" And that is something that I understood. Today, when I do a lot of orientations and I do a lot of lectures at universities for budding talent, I tell them that, always be down to earth, never challenge gravity. And the second thing she actually told me was something that I didn't understand, Syed, and it took me so many years, just 10, 12 years ago, I started understanding what she actually told me back then. She said that you're going to become very successful, but make sure you always sit on top of the chair never sits on top of you. And that was something that didn't make any sense. And just 10, 12 years back, everything just started falling into perspective. And so not knowingly, she's had a very inspiring impact on my life, and I owe everything to my mother.
And during that period of, say, however number of years after university you spent in your career, how many years was that?
Yes, quite enough, I would say.
Okay. What were the most defining periods, would you say, when you see your life? I mean, during your career, what do you think kind of changed it for you? You have these defining, significant moments that say that something opens up for you.
Well, I think hindsight is a luxury, right? Today, if everybody just looks at the past, they'll say that I should have done this and I should have done that. But honestly, I'm just blessed.
You don't have any calculated thinking about what?
Not really. I never planned to be the CEO of the bank, of any bank for that matter. It's funny enough, and I keep bringing up my mother because she's important, and everything is so related, right? So when I became the CEO of the bank, I actually called my mom. She's in India now, so I called my mom. My parents live in India. So I called her and I said that, Mommy, I became the CEO of the bank. She says, okay, tell me when you become the manager, right? So that actually tells you, the sort of family that we came from, and I take pride in saying who we are. But I think there were no defining moments, Syed. When you look back, you can write a story. All successful people, you try and say that all the successful people are college dropouts, right? Whether it's Bill Gates or it's Steve Jobs or whoever. But success to me is very relative. People might think that an individual is successful, but success is very relative. One might think that somebody is successful and he might not. So no defining moments. Hindsight is a luxury. So if I look back, I can say that there's nothing I can pinpoint my journey to. I think I was in the right place at the right time. Everything that I did with a lot of passion.
So your lesson in life is basically just work hard, and if it comes to you, it will come to you.
My lesson in life is very simple.
So I can never be the CEO of Dubai Islamic Bank.
Because you don't work hard, right? Huh? Yeah. My lesson in life is very simple, right? And without boring the audience, because we are here for Islamic finance, not to talk about me, but to talk about a discipline. But my lesson in life is very simple. It is, everybody has a vision, and that vision is to become something, and everybody has role models. People inspire each and every one of us. But in the process of becoming that someone, we lose our own identity. Everybody wants to become X and become Y, and in the process we lose our own identity. And I think what is important to understand is do what you feel is right, and success is only relative. It will only follow. The last bit I want to talk about success is, everybody talks about, oh, look at that guy, and thank you. You introduced me in a way that I think I don't deserve this kind of introduction, honestly. But what is success? Success is getting what you want, right? What is success to everybody? Even though it's relative, it is getting what you want. But happiness is liking what you get. So as long as you're happy, you can become successful. But if you're successful, you can't become happy. So I think with that very humble philosophy, I think I have come a long way in my life.
Contentment.
Self-contentment.
Excellent. Thank you. So, yeah, you mentioned moving back to Islamic finance. I want to understand, Dubai Islamic Bank is obviously in a very good growth trajectory. Seems like you have a very strong handle of it, and it's made a very good comeback. But what's your vision? In 10 years' time, if you were to look at Dubai Islamic Bank, what is it that you'd want Dubai Islamic Bank to be? Do you want it to be the global Islamic bank? Is that in your ambition, or is it something else?
Everybody wants to make it big in life, right? Any financial institution would want to, leap into the next league. I don't want Dubai Islamic Bank to become a global bank. I want Dubai Islamic Bank to be a globally recognized bank. And there's a difference, right? So we might be doing things within our country of domicile. We might be expanding regionally. We now have international presence as well. But the objective is not to become a global player. The objective is to become a brand which is globally recognized. And there's a difference between the two, right? Often what people make mistakes, and we've got a lot of regional players coming into Asia, going into Africa, and so on and so forth. But the mistake that most people do, or most institutions do, is they are trying to copy someone, right? They're trying to become a particular international brand, and I have to be politically correct, so I won't name any, because some of them are falling as we speak. But they want to become a global institution. And in the process of doing that, they do not have adequate disciplines in place, adequate structures in place, adequate policies in place, and they miss the bus. So I think humble aspirations, you need to be a brand that is globally recognized rather than becoming a global brand. And if you ask me, Dubai Islamic Bank, and what is its vision is not to be the biggest. Its vision is not to be the strongest. Its vision is not to be the largest. Its vision is to be the most progressive Islamic financial institution in the world. And progress is a journey. It never stops. So if we are at a particular level today, we want to go into the next level rather than trying to say we want to become number one. But because if today I'm number one, tomorrow somebody else will become number one. And then we can't change our vision to become the number two biggest Islamic bank. So I think superlatives like big, large, strong, safe are superlatives good to have. They look good on your resume, but one has to understand what your own key strengths are, and we want to be the most progressive. Not to become a global bank, but to be a brand that is globally recognized.
But it's a nice concept. What does globally recognized mean? You have to differentiate yourself in some way. You need to stick out.
Oh, absolutely. I can.
What does that mean?
Today, if you see, Islamic banking started way back in 1975. Syed talks about 40 years. It started in Dubai. It started in the UAE.
Were you born then?
So when Islamic banking started in 1975, it started in Dubai as a concept which was based on participation. It was based on partnership. It was a pioneering innovation within the financial services industry, right? Nobody even heard about Islamic banking. Today, you've got sovereigns from non-Islamic states, even in the capital markets, whether it's Luxembourg, whether it is Hong Kong or South Africa or whatever. Yeah. But back then, it was a concept that was unheard of. It was a concept that came out of a book, right? But today, with non-Islamic markets actually adopting that concepts, they have not changed their legislation. They have not changed, their way of their fiscal policies or their monetary policies. But what they've done is they want to probe into the idea of Islamic finance. Islamic finance has become globally recognized. It's not a global brand yet, but it has become globally recognized. Today, everybody in the world, no matter whether you're in Far East or you're in Africa or you're in the West, you have heard about Islamic banking. Now, these countries don't have an Islamic bank operating in, right? So you don't have brands that go there and set up shop. But what has happened is the concept has become so strong and universal that it has become globally recognized. I want Dubai Islamic Bank to become globally recognized so that when anybody talks about Islamic finance, anywhere in the world, they say, you know what, let's talk to Dubai Islamic Bank. We may not be having operations on the ground in a particular country, but we should still have that one phone call because we are a globally recognized bank.
And what will distinguish you to make you that globally recognized bank?
I think
from all the other players in the market, you have people will go to Islamic Development Bank, or people will go to some of your competitors. Why would they go to you? What would make you different?
I think the philosophy actually is cascaded from the top. Today, I would say in the last 10 years or so, Dubai Islamic Bank per se has become globally recognized more than ever before, even though it started its operation in 1975. And the reason to do that is because we've pioneered innovation in a lot of areas. We keep talking about sukuks and capital market bonds, Islamic bonds, and so on and so forth. Where did this all start from? It started at Dubai Islamic Bank, right? It started 15 years ago. The first sukuk that was actually done was done for one of the corporates within Dubai. Today, that has become a universally accepted phenomena, even though we have not been operating in the countries that are issuing these Islamic bonds. So I think one of the key aspects would be pioneering innovation, which we've done. And we continue to do that as we speak. We maybe don't boast of it as much as we should do. But for example, profit rate swaps today or Islamic derivatives that we talk about are concepts that were homegrown within Dubai Islamic Bank, right? And I think being the first Islamic bank in the world, we have that responsibility to make sure that we continue that innovation. The second aspect that would make us a globally recognized brand would be technology. We've got to make sure that technology now plays a part in making sure that Islamic finance reaches areas and pockets that it did not reach before. Whether it is microfinance or it is microcredit, as you refer to, and going into a lot of areas of developing nations. Would not be possible by your brick and mortar models anymore. It would only be possible if you have technology. Everybody in the world today has a mobile and a SIM. So I think using that platform, you can take Islamic finance to greater levels and make it a more globally recognizable brand.
And do you have those plans yourself?
Absolutely, we do. I think we've started those plans. We are not there yet. clearly, because by the time you get there, technology changes. So you've got to really be, you have to up your game. But definitely we have some ambitious plans as far as that is concerned in making sure that we have adequate platforms in trying to take Islamic finance in areas where we also have operations in. So for example, we are looking at East Africa and we are looking at Far East Asia. And these two markets have adequate number of players already. They don't need somebody like us, right? But we've made foray into those markets with a plan, with an aspiration that, we can take Islamic finance to the next level. And hopefully, if Allah willing, we will be successful in those.
Before we go into kind of Asia, what's your vision for Islamic finance? Having seen it evolve over the several banks that you've worked in the Islamic finance industry, what's your vision in 10 years' time? Say, what would you think that the world should look at in Islamic finance and say, it will be globally recognized, or what impact will it have?
I've been saying this a lot on social media as well, right? I don't have a Facebook account, but
you can follow him on Twitter if you like.
Yeah, that's the only account that I know how to manage, right? So I might be the youngest looking CEO, but I really don't know how to manage Facebook.
So are you a millennial?
Am I what?
Are you a millennial?
No. I've been saying this on social media. I've been saying this on social media a lot. I want Islamic finance to be a norm of banking and not an alternate of banking. Today, I think it really pains me in people when they start comparing Islamic finance and conventional finance. A 400-year-old industry versus a 40-year-old industry. It really is painful to know that we are always benchmarked against the conventional discipline only because it existed before Islamic finance started. So I think we are making good progress in making sure that Islamic finance not only becomes a globally recognized phenomena, but I would want in the next 10 years for it to become a norm of banking rather than an alternative form of banking.
We're very far away from that, and specifically so in Asia, right? You've made forays into Indonesia last year, I believe, right? Or the year before?
Yeah, last year.
Last year, into the largest market in Asia. But as we've seen, this year it may be looking up for Indonesia, but for the past 10 years, everybody's been talking about Indonesia. Everyone's been talking about the huge potential of that market. But many people who've gone into that market have been stung badly. They haven't seen the returns that they wanted to see.
Yeah.
And they haven't grown, even if they were Sharia compliant, right? Even if you look at the penetration of Islamic finance in Indonesia, it's about 5%.
Yeah.
What do you think the role of potential is for yourself and for Dubai Islamic Bank in Asia? And can you actually grow? What's your plan for Asia? And what do you think is the potential?
Well, clearly there is tremendous potential, and we are not trying to follow anybody here, right? We've been looking at the Asian markets for some time, but every time that we actually wanted to enter one of these markets, it just did not make commercial sense for us. I think one should not forget that this is not charity business. You've got to make sure that you have enough returns that go up to the shareholder. I think where people have gone wrong is sitting in our own ivory towers wherever we are. We think that we know everything about the world, right? So there are some of the regional players or some of the GCC players that came into these markets, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's Indonesia, or some of the markets, and presumed that if we are successful at home, we can be successful anywhere else in the world, which reiterates the point that you should stop wanting to be a global bank, one, and as opposed to being a globally recognized brand. These banks, regional banks that you allude to, that are not so successful and could not grow, were trying to compete with some of the larger domestic players in the market. So I'll give you an example. Let's say if we are the largest Islamic bank within the UAE and the third largest in the world, if a player out of Malaysia, for that matter, comes into the UAE, you can't expect that player to make inroads into our markets because we are the homegrown local brand. I think the aspirations that a lot of regional and local banks had to become successful in some of the markets that they tried to operate in, Far East Asia being one, was wrong in my opinion. You definitely need to make sure that you have the right partner on the ground to have, let's say, a joint venture with some of the local bank, because local know-how is very important, which is the strategy that we adopted. In case of Indonesia, we did not come and manage 100% operations on the ground, not because the regulator does not allow it, that's a different thing, but there are ways around it. But we made sure that we find the right partner on ground in order to take forward our Indonesian operations, and we found that on ground here. So we are now have a 40% stake in one of the local
Bank Panin.
Bank Panin.
Yeah.
We have a 40% stake, and Panin is a homegrown Indonesian bank, and it's very strong when it comes to its core operations. Now, how do we add value to Panin's operations? And these are Panin's Islamic operations, is that the know-how that we've developed over 40 years in Islamic finance is something that we want to bring on the table to Panin. And with Panin's local knowledge, whether it is the cultural knowledge that they have, or it's the knowledge about the corporates or the sovereign space that they have, and their ability to enter into the uncharted territories of Indonesia, right? Which puts in perspective of our plans about growing through microfinance, through microcredit, based on Islamic principles that we boast of over 40 years, with a local brand which is as strong as Panin, making commercial sense for the shareholder at Dubai Islamic Bank, because we've not made a very large equity investment, right? So I think where people got their strategies wrong in the past was they thought it is all about the money. So let's bring our money, let's pump it into a market and we will grow. So they went wrong there. If it was not about the money with some of the other players, they did not get the right partner. And if they got the right partner and if they had the adequate capital, then they did not have a strategy that would be unique as opposed to some of the other strategies that some of these banks are following, right? So I think it's a combination that has worked for us, and it's a combination that we have studied very well over the last so many years and have not made any hasty decision in trying and coming into a new market. We are walking before we run. We know what exactly we want. There's a strategy. There's a 5-year, 10-year strategy for Far East Asia. It revolves around Indonesia. It also revolves around Malaysia. And Malaysia. It also revolves around Malaysia. And I think it's a strategy that we are seeing work for us. And it's a strategy that you will not see us overnight getting bigger and acquiring a lot of institutions here and there. We are humble players with very modest beginnings, so I think we'll continue to do that.
So you're making Dubai Islamic Bank a reflection of yourself?
I think an institution is always reflection of the leadership that is on the helm of it. And I think if this style of leadership actually is good, the audience can judge that. But if it is good, then I'm glad that it is the right leadership at the bank. Okay. And if it is not good, then there will be somebody else that will be taking up that challenge.
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have anything you'd like to ask Dr. Adnan Chilwan.
No, please. You can ask Farooq, because he has the easiest job, right? That is to sit there, be a moderator and just ask questions. Absolutely, so I think we'll turn the tables.
You can ask me as well. I'm going to ask him on your behalf. Now, I wanted to touch base on, you mentioned, this is very close to a lot of people's hearts, and obviously there's a passion behind this. You mentioned microfinance and Indonesia, and that's the way you want to tap into that. And you know, we've been hearing about this here in this part of the world, that there's a lot of funds looking into this area, because it's just yesterday on our dinner, we heard about a fund that wants to set up with 500,000 cooperatives in Indonesia. Yeah. 500,000. I mean, I don't think, you know, some of the banks in UAE have even that many customers.
Huge market, yes.
Cooperatives, right? But the thing is that, you know, we're not up for that game. Do you think?
Says who?
I mean, as Islamic banks, we haven't been for a long time.
This is the whole point I was trying to make in the question that you asked me, right? It's not just going into tree with your capital and trying to set up shop and just say that, we got it wrong. You refer to some of the regional players that got it wrong. And when I articulated my strategy for Indonesia, I told you it's a combination of a lot of things: capital, local know-how, and I told you microfinance. It's because of these reasons and the local partner's ability to enter into those cooperatives is why we've tied up with that local partner, right? So it's a strategy that has already been put into action with Dubai Islamic Bank entering the Indonesian market. So some of the funds that you're talking about want to tie up with cooperatives. We've already done that, right? And it's a strategy because in the absence of that, it's not going to work. You just can't come and just have 10 branches operating out of Indonesia's main cities and Jakarta and so on and so forth, and then compete with the likes of Mandiri and compete with the likes of, Bank Indonesia or Muamalat or whoever, right? So for you to actually grow into these territories, you've got to do something which is not been done before. And I would always encourage all the Islamic banks to follow that model. It's not a model that is unique to us. Please follow that model and enter into areas that you've not entered into.
Outside of microfinance, microcredit, where else do you see the opportunities in Asia?
Well, there's a lot of opportunity for SME credit in Asia because the Asian markets are all SME based. But clearly these two things that come to my mind, they would continue to be opportunity within the sovereign, quasi-sovereign and corporate space, right? But there are a lot of international banks that bid for that kind of business. There are a lot of local banks. Then when you want to, indulge in a capital markets activity, an Islamic bond, and if you're an Asian corporate or an Asian sovereign, you want to place that back in the GCC, then you will look at somebody like, a Dubai Islamic Bank or some of the regional players to make sure that you can tap that investor base. But if you are already operating with a very strong, Indonesian rupiah market or a Malaysian ringgit market, you are not looking outside. You're looking at other players to come in with capital. And I think capital is finite. You've got to make sure that you've got to use it properly. And it needs to be supported by a very well-crafted strategy. And I think our strategy is the right way to go about it.
And I mean, you mentioned connecting the capital from the GCC, which still has a lot of money in the banking system that's looking for home. But as we've seen, maybe, and time will tell how good your strategy is, and I hope it is very successful. It sounds very sound. But as we've seen, there's been a lot of interest in moving the capital and Islamic finance being a means to move that capital to from the GCC, which is capital rich, to the Asian markets.
Yeah.
But I mean, how do we actually take real measures towards that outside of trade, right? How do we actually have real FDI coming into these markets from the GCC? Because we have seen very small amounts as compared to the potential that this market has.
I think there is a natural flow of capital from the GCC into not only Asia but also Africa for a very simple reason, and especially Islamic capital is because there are hardly any Islamic assets you can invest your liquidity in, right? So you would find various structures that take form of this capital transition. Some of them can be capital markets, some of them can be equity participations, some of them can be setting up of funds and doing asset management. But clearly, I think there is still excess liquidity sitting back in the GCC that needs to be deployed. It's not only a matter of capital. If you don't have the right vision of making sure that capital is deployed, you're going to burn that capital. And I think we are seeing some of the regional GCC players exiting the Asian markets. Clearly because, they came with very big checkbooks, but, did not get their strategies right.
I mean, and in terms of this, what is, if I was an Asian financial institution, what is it that you would be interested in doing with me? What is it that you'd want to partner with? What is it, if I were to submit a proposal, what are the kinds of proposals you'd be open to hearing from this part of the world?
Well, I think our Asian partners, we have Asian partners in Malaysia as well as in Indonesia. So to just give you some perspective, is we would be opening to take a position in the sovereign space of these countries. We would be in a position to take some equity within, some of the banks that are looking to recapitalize themselves, provided that it forms a part of our global strategy to get into.
And only Malaysia and Indonesia?
Well, I think, again, there are a lot of points on the map that we have plotted, but being a publicly listed entity, we are not at the liberty to share those. But clearly, I think if you have these two markets looked at, you have major part of the Far East Asian markets covered.
And outside of Southeast Asia, what do you, and including Southeast Asia, what are the next big growth areas you think in terms of Islamic finance? Regions and countries, distribution channels, regions and countries specifically first. Where do you see the most promising growth for you?
Well, I see most promising growth in two markets, right? And if you just look at the Asian markets, one, I see promising growth in Indonesia, and the second, I see promising growth in India. Clearly, I think a lot of people may or may not know that India has the second largest Muslim population in the world, right? With about 180 Muslims, 180 million Muslims, obviously. Now, these are markets that I feel have a lot of potential, these two markets. And, but again, they are at a various level of progressiveness in their own way on the spectrum of, regulatory as well as fiscal as well as monetary changes that need to be made. India is still back in the game, right? The legislation does not allow Islamic banks to operate in India. You have now licenses for what we call NBFCs, non-banking financial companies. So I think if you want Islamic banking to grow in these markets, then it has to be a full-fledged bank rather than an NBFC.
So, but are you actually looking to make any forays into India now, as we speak?
We have aspirations. I think too early in the game. But
I would think that, given the challenges with the political resistance there towards anything Islamic, and specifically Islamic financial institutions, even in the South we noticed this. Do you think it's a realistic thing to assume anything in the near future without a change in the mindset? I know that Modi, for instance, made a lot of visits even before he became the Prime Minister to the Gulf states. But since then we've had a lot of very disheartening news, right? Even with this fund that they were supposed to launch, I believe in Mumbai, they had to close it down, right? Because of resistance.
I don't think so there's political resistance. I think there clearly has to be a legislative and a monetary change to policies, right? And we have had a lot of discussions with the relevant parties within these jurisdictions. And it is clearly not something that is going to happen overnight tomorrow. The intent is there, and I think the intent is at both ends. They definitely want to look at it, but remember, it's a very large ship, right? And it does not know anything about this form of banking. So it is going to take some time, but I think perseverance needs to be there, and one needs to be patient. These things don't happen overnight. We've gone into uncharted territories in the past that did not hear about Islamic finance, but we managed to, talk to the relevant people, and we've got our form of banking there. So I think it's a matter of time. Somebody has to take.
So you mentioned, I guess India could be looked at as a medium-term growth opportunity, but in the immediate term, you've gone to some interesting places. You've gone to Kenya. What's your view on Africa?
Why is it interesting?
It's interesting because it was relatively unbanked by Islamic financial institutions, with the exception of a few, and
that's why we went in.
No one else is there, right?
That's why we went in.
Why?
Well, clearly, I think if you look at Africa, and then Africa, if you divide into West and East, if you look at East Africa, the East African belt has many countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Malawi, and we are looking at 100 million Muslims on that East African belt, one. There are aspirations for Africa to connect with Asia. And, this corridor flows through the UAE. There are ambitions on part of the government also to make sure that they connect these two regions together and make Africa and Asia as trade partners. There is trade that is flourishing between the two countries, two continents rather, but it requires to flow through a geographical jurisdiction, which is UAE. And we are, I think, naturally placed in the heart of that ambition to try and take Islamic finance to an area that you say is uncharted. There are actually 2 Islamic banks operating within Kenya. But I think our positioning in East Africa is not that we are bringing Islamic banking. One thing, Syed, you should understand is we are not banking on beliefs here. We are not trying to go and sell the Islamic prophecy that, if you're a Muslim, you need to have an Islamic bank. Everything that we do is within our DNA is Islamic. So there will be no compromise ever on that. But we want to make sure that there is a value proposition for the clientele that we want to service. And so, for example, we'll have to compete on price, we'll have to compete on service, we'll have to compete on technology, we'll have to compete on all those key USPs that people compete on. And guess what? We are Islamic in nature, right? So when you go, if you want to travel from east to west, you don't go to a travel agent and tell him that, give me an airline that is the most safest. That is something that is within the DNA of the airline industry. You have to fly a plane that is safe, right? So we are not going to go and talk about Islamic banking, our proposition is Islamic, this is more ethical, and so on and so forth. All those are within the DNA of Islamic banks. But what we are going to do is we say that we are competing on all these key USPs that I have mentioned, and we do our business Islamically. So I think that approach and that philosophy makes sure that, people open their hearts and their minds to try and even explore what kind of banking this is. In the West, we call it ethical banking. In some of the countries, other countries, we call it participation banking. We call it Islamic banking in our part of the world. But it's a nomenclature. It's the way you are doing your business defines who you are. And if you do it with what the audience is looking for, what the people are looking for in terms of products, in terms of service, in terms of technology, in terms of price, and you do it Islamically, I think you can make it a more globally recognized brand.
It's interesting. But how are you seeing your actual investments right now play out in Kenya, for instance?
Well, Kenya is a greenfield operations. So we are setting up shop, and we will start operating very soon towards the mid of this year, if latest.
The news and the vibes that you're receiving, is there a lot of interest?
Oh, absolutely, there's a lot of interest. In fact, we are working with the government also now to look at tapping, international capital markets and sovereign space. Islamic banking is, there is a reputation that precedes us, thankfully, and we have gathered some excellent momentum, even though we've not started operations on the ground, and we are dealing with regulators right now, and it's always a process. But we've received some fantastic feedback, and I think we are very keen to start operations very soon, so that we can start expanding in other areas of Africa as well.
A lot of people have concerns about the GCC banks and the financial system in general, because the oil prices are sliding. There's a declining performance that's been forecasted because the central banks and the sovereign wealth funds are slowly reducing the deposits in the financial system. And we've seen this happen to a lot of the banks, right? I mean, and you're seeing it in the deposits that are being registered. What's your view and outlook for this year? And what's your doomsday scenario if the the oil prices continue to stay as low? Yes, they will be tapping capital markets more, potentially, the sovereigns in this part of the world. But it may affect your performance and your lending also. Or what do you think? I think,
oil is a much talked about topic these days, right? But a few things that some of you know, some of you don't know. The situation that we are in vis-a-vis oil and the prices that we are seeing today is something that is not new to the region. Back in 2008 also, we were trading oil at these very prices, right? So it's not like another financial crisis, which a lot of investors who probably don't even know where the GCC is talk about it. So when I do a lot of road shows in North America or US for that matter, or some of the European countries, they start talking about things that might not necessarily be true. So the prices that we are witnessing for oil today are prices that we have seen way back even in 2008, as recent as 2008. One. Two is, we keep talking about this reduced infrastructure spending, and you come out of Dubai. I have been leading this institution for some time now, and oil, the price of oil volatility started in 2014, second quarter, third quarter. Since then, we've seen balance sheets grow, to be very honest with you. The deposits that we are referring to being taken out of the banks, if you actually look at the consolidated balance sheet, I'll just tell you UAE for that matter, the balance sheet of the UAE has grown by about 8%, right? This is the consolidated balance sheet. And as you know, balance sheets only grow when deposits grow. So money is definitely flowing in. The infrastructure spending that we are referring to has curtail of infrastructure spending I have not seen so far. We are a part of every sovereign and quasi-sovereign deal that is coming in the market. So we are in the thick of things. Well, the point that one should understand is that the OPEC countries are in a position they consciously want to be in. And this is not something that is beyond anybody's control. This is a position that people consciously want to be in, and they might have an agenda, whether it is to run somebody out of production or it is a more geopolitical scenario. But the position that we are in is a position that the OPEC countries want to be in. Now, in the third quarter, oil was trading at 42, 43, 44 Brent per barrel. And analysts were looking at this to be a 2015 backloaded oil recovery. And when I say backloaded oil recovery of 2015, that means in quarter 4, we would see oil trading at 80. They were expecting quarter 3 and quarter 2 to be at the 60s range, and we are making progress there without cutting production or without looking at demand. So I would suggest that, the world starts looking at actual problems and not make a problem grow out of proportion. Oil within the GCC is important. Over years, they have built the financial reserves, and every country has their own financial reserves. So we are looking at an average of 2.5, 3, and 4 years that they can use their financial muscle to weather the storm if oil continues to be at the levels that it is today. But the good thing is that it is making good progress. There are break-even levels of oil for different countries, right? So as long as you reach closer to break-even, your financial surpluses will be created. And the final point that I want to make on oil is that, capital markets always were an option for some of these sovereigns. And we talk about, are the oil companies restructuring debt? So my question to anybody in the audience, if you are from the region, is which of these oil companies have outstanding debt? All these companies are cash-rich companies. So you will never find them in a capital market doing a bond or a sukuk, or you will not find them on a bilateral or a club space or a syndicated space. So these companies who are presumed to be restructuring debt never had debt. So I'm not sure where this information flows from. These companies have always been very cash rich, and if infrastructure spending is required to be done before they start touching deposits that are there within the local banks, they would make sure that their international investments come out first, which we've not seen. So we've not seen any cut down on international investments that some of these sovereign wealth funds have. And finally, oil is a much talked about discussion. If you take Dubai's economy, the contribution of hydrocarbon to Dubai's GDP is only 3 or 4%, which means that it is a very well diversified economy. So oil, no oil, right? The economy is well bolstered to make sure that it can weather these storms. So even though I think it's a talked about topic these days, I think one should understand the greater detail of the problem.
Sure. There's been a lot of talk about the untapped wealth of the global Muslim population. And you mentioned that you're looking at plans to do that in Indonesia in terms of tapping this. But, we've been fairly bad as an industry in addressing that. I mean, 85% of the Islamic finance industry in its entirety is banking. Wealth management is a very small amount.
I'm very happy that in one thing that we are lacking, because if we had this kind of wealth management structured products during the global financial crisis, we would be in the same boat. So
why does it have to be why does it have to be structured products or derivatives? Why can't it be an array of investment instruments? Right now, for instance, I've got $5,000 in my bank account.
You do?
No, I wish I did, but okay. I don't. But if I did, where would I be able to invest it? In a bank deposit? In a property?
No.
That's all I've got.
No, absolutely not. I think there are a lot of Islamic notes that are there coming out, emanating out of the GCC. You can take positions in equities. You can take position in the bond market.
Yeah, but most of the retail wealth in the Islamic space is just emerging, right? And this is an emerging middle class, right? They don't have the capacity like the GCC investors to invest 100,000 or 200,000 in one go. They have the capacity to invest 15, 20, 10,000, maybe, even that so. And they have the capacity to do structured investment plans, right? Maybe. But there's not many options for them.
No, I think, see, I would tend to disagree. I think there are a lot of options, and some of the Asian banks in this room also, and we probably have people from CIMB and maybe, you know, Maybank or whatever, they have options that allow the middle class and the upper middle class to invest in plans, to invest in...
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I have a daughter. When she was born, I'd set up a structured investment plan for her.
Yeah.
How many funds did I have in that?
I'm not sure who you set it up with.
I set it up with the fund platforms, right? It
Okay.
says, you know, and I asked only for Sharia compliant. I had about 10 funds that they gave to me, 3 of them of which have closed down, HSBC, a few of them being, right? Now I have really about 5 or 6. Most of them are Emirates ones, and then maybe now Franklin Templeton has come up with a few.
Yeah.
That's about it.
See, I see there is the direction of travel is right. There are Islamic banks, at least I can talk to you about mine, that is, you know, operating in this space. We don't structure plans ourselves, is because we are not experts in those. So what we do is we do a lot of third-party distribution. So you've got a lot of big boys that have structured plans, and we, in essence, do what we call shelf banking or supermarket banking. Where we allow these international big names having Islamic funds, structured products to actually try and tap this Islamic wealth that you're referring to, which is sitting with our customers in the form of a platform. So we are, in essence, distribution. But honestly, I'm seeing a lot of such investment plans being structured as we speak. We will send you a sales officer
Please don't.
to try and sell you.
You can send me a credit card with some credit limit.
No, that's not a that's not a financial plan. Yeah, credit cards are never financial plans. But
you mentioned a lot of growth plans, international growth plans. A lot of people are concerned about the 2019 Basel
18.
III. 2018 Basel III kicks in the Middle East, and of course everyone's also planning for Basel IV right now.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
But the problem is Basel III is kicking in, and you know all the big banks have already, the global banks have started scaling down their international operations. This has given you guys a great opportunity to scale up, invest, and obviously grow your distribution in markets where the global banks are scaling down. But when Basel III kicks in, what is that going to impact your global expansion plans?
Well, I think we've factored Basel III impact on our balance sheet. At least I can talk about our institution. You see, the regulators have been flirting with this idea of Basel III for a very long time. The 2018 deadline that you are talking about is a full implementation of Basel III. But in some jurisdictions within the GCC, Basel III has already started to be implemented, and the full rollout is 2018. That's how Basel III works. In UAE, Basel III has not started, and it is planned to be probably during the first quarter of 2016, with a full rollout by 2018. And when I say full rollout, I think they're not going to change things overnight. Clearly, you have to grandfather a lot of elements of Basel III. And elements of Basel III is around capital, not only around capital, but around asset quality and around liquidity also. So some of the banks within the GCC, even though in the absence of Basel III, are already Basel III compliant, given the very strong liquidity positions that they have. And you have rightly said that with anticipation of Basel III and full implementation of Basel III, a lot of institutions are looking to tap international markets for capital. You see, when you want to be Basel III compliant, you have to have what we call CET, Common Equity Tier 1 ratios, and you have to have a particular capital adequacy ratio, and then there is a build-up towards that capital adequacy ratio. Now, capital can be structured in many ways. So you always have the option of common equity. So you go to your existing shareholders and you get capital from your existing shareholders. You can look at tier 2 from your existing shareholders or tier 2 from international capital markets. You can look at tier 1 from your existing shareholders or tier 1 from international capital markets. You see a lot of institutions tapping international space today is because the markets are conducive,
Yep.
right? It's because Islamic assets are very scarce. So when an Islamic institution or a non-Islamic institution comes with an Islamic capital requirement, you see a lot of international capital flowing through because people are chasing yields. Today, there are hardly any opportunities to get, double-digit yields. So you're looking at high single-digit yields. And with what is happening around the global financial space, there are very, very little inadequate structures that give you those kind of yields. So when we have been seeing a lot of institutions tapping capital, we've seen them being oversubscribed 3, 4, 5 times only because people are chasing yields, right? So I think Basel III, combined with liquidity requirements, combined with capital requirements, and combined with markets being conducive to someone actually coming out and issuing paper, I think all this put together, you are seeing more and more capital markets.
So in the next 3 years, how many times do you plan to tap the market, given the aggressive growth that you're seeing already?
We are a listed entity, Syed. You'll have to be in the regulatory issues for me to answer that. But clearly, you will see us tapping capital in various forms, not just tier one. But clearly, right now, in January, we were on the road. We've tapped capital.
Yep.
Right? That was oversubscribed about 4 times. So we have capital, and let's not forget, we are also generating capital organically, right? So there is capital generation organically because profits are being retained, not everything is being distributed. So I think...
You plan to do rights issues as well?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. I want to give the opportunity to the floor to ask some questions. I'm sure all of you have some burning questions for Dr. Adnan with his accumulated wisdom.
Are you done?
No, I'm not done. But before I'm done, I'd like to give the opportunity to the floor as well. Anyone with any questions for Dr. Adnan?
Yeah, I have $1 million answer for Syed. If you want his age, I
$1 million answer. Okay, not a question, an answer. Please go ahead.
Yes, Adnan, thank you very much. It's a great information that you have shared. May Allah give you barakah, inshallah, to lead this organization to a global brand.
Ameen.
Not a bank, huh? My question, Adnan, 2 questions I have, if you allow me to ask these 2 questions. First question is, how do we attract the non-Muslims to get into the Islamic banking fold? And if they have a choice in the UAE, whether I should go to the global bank like HSBC or I come to the global brand bank DIB, what attracts the non-Muslims to get into the Islamic banking fold?
Brother, exactly what we've been doing. Syed talks about our growth for 2014. If you look at the population dynamics within the UAE, predominantly it's a non-Muslim population, right? So if you just look at where the population within the UAE is, and the influx of expatriates and all show you that there is the distribution of the population within some of the GCC countries might be predominantly non-Muslims, given the expat population. I think our strategy and the success of our strategy revolves around this very unique positioning that we have. We are not only catering to that Muslim niche. And in order to cater to everybody, you've got to make sure that you can meet the demands of everybody. And that you can only do by the value proposition that I referred to. So you've got to make sure that you compete on service, you compete on technology, you compete on product, you compete on need-based banking rather than, you make a product and you say that, this is our product, you take it. You've got to understand what the various needs of the market are and then structure products, and everything that you will structure will be structured Islamically, right? So there's no compromise there. But today, if you actually tell the consumer that you have a product which meets all the requirements that the consumer is looking for, convenience, accessibility, safety of his money, security, pricing, key USPs, there is no reason why a customer would not say, I want your product. And I think today, we are competing in that space, which is very, very overbanked. As you know, there are 50-odd banks within the UAE, and we are the largest Islamic bank and a very significant player now in the market. We are only able to do that because of these very simple strategies that I'm sure you agree to.
And one more question, that little provocative question I learned from Professor Andrew. Adnan, being in the industry and you are leading a bank, what really frustrates you when it comes to Islamic finance?
When people start comparing us with the 400-year-old industry, right? It is extremely frustrating when people say that you've been growing at an compounded average annual growth of 17%, but guess what? Your denominator is very slow, so the percentage very small, so the percentage looks big, right? So I think if you look at the growth of Islamic finance industry in absolute terms, you'll see that it is really growing. But our friend Syed also here is a very, very good critique of the Islamic finance industry, as you would have gathered. And he tried to bring me on stage to create this controversy so that, and it's a sellout crowd actually. People have bought 2 or 3 seats per head. But it really disappoints and disturbs me when people say that, where are you? You are 1% of the global markets, when it comes to the assets. Of course we'll be 1%. We just started 40 years ago, yeah? So give us a break.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yes.
This one. I have one.
Good afternoon. Okay.
We can hear you.
Hi. So my question is a bit different. Do you think tying up Islamic banking with something like ESG or SRI a bit more closely would help the momentum of growing Islamic bank?
What is ESG, sorry?
Environmental, social governance.
Okay.
And social responsible
Social
investment.
responsible investments. The asset management industry.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll try and research on that a little more. Yeah.
Adnan, please.
But so I have to be a little.
Yeah, a little.
Right. I think. I honestly, I don't have the answer to that question. Honestly, maybe Syed, you want to? Is it really helpful?
We're really supporting it ourselves. Yes, absolutely.
Are you?
Yes.
Okay.
We think that's the future. Absolutely.
Possibly, yeah. But you know what? When I have an answer to that question, I'll probably try and look for you here. But
Okay, thank you.
yeah, are the conventional banks actually doing that as well?
Tying up ESG.
Yes.
There are how do you say, asset managers, institutional investors who are trying to incorporate SRI into their.
Let me ask you a question, if I may. Why is when it comes to being socially responsible, people start looking at Islamic institutions and not non-Islamic institutions? Are these institutions not supposed to be socially responsible?
I think what they're looking more here is because there's a common ground maybe with ethical investing.
Every investment in this world has to be ethical.
Well, I mean, the default, you see, the thing is that a lot of the financial institutions, they don't hold themselves out to be anything. So we don't know whether or not they're ethical or not. In Islamic finance, you hold yourself out to be ethical, right?
And people like you criticize us.
Yes, absolutely. But
A round of applause for Syed Farooq, please. Please.
And so, going back to your point, and I don't want to harp on it too much, we certainly do believe that, and we will be inviting you to speak in that, and we'll grill you like the same way we did here. But one of the things we are seeing is that, of course, there's a $12 trillion ESG space and investing space in the West, right? And it's becoming very active. Right now, while we're speaking, there's an event that's happening in London. It's called the Responsible Investor Event. That's got about 600 people, a lot of asset owners there. And the good thing about it is what is the bad thing about Islamic finance, which is the asset management industry is tapping that. And there's about $12 trillion. They're professionally managed, but we don't have that scale in any form whatsoever. What would be ideal is if we can start talking to them and start convincing these asset managers to say that, listen, you just have to adjust this a little bit, just adjust this a little bit, and you've got another pool of wealth that's very rapidly emerging. That's your opportunity. And that's what we're trying to do to support it. We're launching a report in Edinburgh, Scotland, for the Global Ethical Finance Forum, which Professor Andrew White just mentioned, where we'll be actually trying to figure out how to get these markets to collaborate and converge and provide the scale that Islamic finance so desperately needs in the asset management side. But outside of that, what I want to do is get back onto topic, which is Dr. Adnan Chilwan's age. No, the last thing I wanted to ask you, I'm a budding young banker. I would like to work with you.
You are? Okay.
No. How do I, to work with a leader like yourself, what kind of talent, skills do you look for when you look at your potential candidates to be deputies, to be the next CEO, or to help you grow your business? What kind of things do you look for in the next generation?
I think there has to be a combination of both competencies as well as behavioral aspects of an individual, right? So I think for me personally, I think I'm a people's person. I believe in building teams around me, and I believe in successor planning.
You don't answer my emails, so you must not be a people's
You never
person.
send me emails. You send it to my secretary. But I think passion is critical for everybody,
Yeah.
right? Often you might find a lot of individuals that might be very competent, but might not have the behavioral skills, or somebody might be a very friendly people's person, but might not have the competency. So I think it's a combination of everything. So if you have people like you, I would definitely try and make them as
Avoid
my
them.
deputy. But
Really? Can I submit my resume to you now?
you have to, yeah, you can, you
Yeah?
can, you can.
Will I be the youngest CEO, or will you still?
You
hold
will
that?
be the oldest looking youngest CEO.
Great. Now, I mean, everyone looks at you and says, you're a success, and a very young success. Hopefully, we'll know your age by the time it's finished. But you're a young success, and they want to aspire to be like you. But presumably, and I'm sure you have, you've seen failures, right? What kind of failures did you have?
I have never failed.
You've never failed in your life.
I have never failed because I think failure and success is all about perspective. And I say this with all my heart and all my passion. Everybody talks about grass being greener on the other side. I always say grass is green where you water it. So I think failure to me is again very relative.
Setbacks,
Challenges.
challenges.
Yeah, absolutely there are challenges. I think life would not be life if there were no challenges. I always, you recollect, I always talk about Sir Thomas Alva Edison, right? Sir Thomas Alva Edison, as everybody knows, is the person who invented light. Extremely shy person, just like me.
Can I be the Tesla?
Extremely shy person, physically challenged, hearing impaired, born fidgety, discovers light, and is sitting in the audience just like this. And a lot of journalists are asking him questions. Sir Thomas, there is a very subtle difference between success and failure, but even smaller difference between failure and quitting, right? So you've not quit. You failed so many times. Can you tell us, can you give us the secret of your success? So extremely shy, person sitting in the audience, he actually looks at the person and he says, failed? Who said I failed? I found 10,000 ways in which a light does not work, right? So it's all a matter of perspective. To me, I feel I have never failed. To me, I feel I have not been as successful as I should be, right? It's perspective. But definitely challenges are there in life. Life is nothing but, it's a journey, and it's like photography. You need the negatives to develop it. So as long as you have negatives, you'll develop life.
So if you were to look at your career, what were the biggest challenges you faced? So you said, you know what, I didn't quite get that right.
I think the biggest challenge I faced was the people's challenge.
But you've obviously become a very people's person now. So.
I think I have. I learned a two from you, but but I've become the challenge that I actually faced was people. It was because when you are who you are and when you are young, people always try and see age is important. So if he's young, he probably can't lead the institution. So I think that was the biggest challenge. But I also dyed my hair a little to look a little older. I also kept a goatee once upon a time just to kind of look my age. But I think this is all beyond us now. I think we've come a long way. That was the biggest challenge. Other than that, managing an institution, I think if you have the best people around you, you will be blessed. To be a CEO of Dubai Islamic Bank is probably the easiest thing that I have done in my life.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Adnan Chilwan.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Keeping the attention.
Any questions, Abhi? Any audience questions?
Oh, I think we'll pick it up now. It's finished. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adnan Chilwan. Thank you for coming all the way from Dubai. That was very enlightening.